The Jack the Ripper killing spree, Masonic secret societies, the royal family covering things up again, lobotomies, and even the Elephant Man. This movie has everything.
I was recently round my grandma's house and I was looking through my granddad's books and I just spied The Crimes, Detection and Death of Jack the Ripper by I think an author called Martin Fido. I've been very obsessed, like most people actually, with any serial killer stuff, but do you remember in like history at school where you'd like cover different subjects, like you'd done the Blitz and all that? I was just for some reason just intrigued, and ever since then, many years, about Jack the Ripper. The mythicalness of it, like the way that he would just go strike in the shadows and just slink off like some sort of ghost that has never been kind of found. Everyone's still trawling through the notes and looking at stuff. Lastly, what I really like about it is there's so many crazy, wacky theories, and like amateur historians are like, it's this guy, but no one will ever know, and I just love that.
Jack the Ripper is the Hitler of serial killers.
Yeah.
He's so historic, so famous, so mythical, and yet a lot of times, especially when you're young, when I was young, you'd hear about, you'd watch documentaries and hear about some of the death tolls of killers like Ted Bundy and people that put Jack the Ripper to shame. So you kind of, a lot of time I just thought, I don't know, I wasn't that fussed about it. And then when I got older and I started really reading all the different crazy theories about it, and just how it really set the tone for what a serial killer meant in culture and popular culture. He was the first.
Yeah.
Whoever he may be. And what's fascinating is it's not so much who the serial killer is and what he does, as much as the public's obsession around him, panic around him, fascination around him, sometimes lust for him, as it's a very common thing for serial killers to get females writing in or coming to their prison cells, wanting to visit them, wanting to marry them.
What is unusual to see is that many of the onlookers are women, young women, contemporaries of the 5 Florida State sorority sisters who were assaulted in their beds a year and a half ago.
Every time he turns around, I kind of get that feeling, oh no, he's gonna get me next,
But yet you're fascinated by him.
Very, very. Every night.
Bundy had dozens of women showing up during his court trials who were just infatuated by him. There's something about the public's obsession with the most disturbing people in our society who really, they shouldn't be. It's not glamorizing them, but it is by just the fact that we are so obsessed with them, and we make these thrillers and Hollywood movies about them where, whenever you see a serial killer, they're always cunning, they're always very clever, they always make logical sense when they say their big speech when they've been caught at the end. But in reality, they're some of the most sad, pathetic people in society when you really get a look at them up close. And psychologists and criminal profilers have said the man that did these killings, based on what we know about criminal profiling, would have not have been a refined character we get in this movie. He would have been a schizophrenic mess. His mind would have been all over the place. He wouldn't have been able to keep a job down. He would have just been a complete pathetic loser.
Yeah. Oi, behave yourselves or bugger off.
Yeah, you can bugger off and all. We work, girls. We work the streets harder.
But one of the main reasons that he got away with it, Declan, is because of the people he was targeting. Number one, no one gave a shit about streetwalkers or prostitutes. They were like, even though they tried to investigate it, much like today, unfortunately, it's still very stigmatised. The person isn't seen as a person because of what they do. It's like, who cares about that whore?
And they're still targeted today, because even though, it doesn't have anywhere near the amount of stigma now, and people are obviously, for the most part, more sympathetic to it. But they're still the most vulnerable people in society, or some of the most vulnerable people in society.
Yeah.
And there's a reason serial killers always really go after women, because they're weaker and easier to target.
Yeah.
And always go after vulnerable women, which, you know, an easy, accessible version of that is a prostitute.
Yep.
And speaking of unfortunate, as they like to call themselves in the movie, unfortunates, my God, like, Victorian era London has never looked so grotesque. It is in a way a cartoonish portrayal of it, but
Yeah.
I love it. Like it through that cartoonish nature, it's sold to me just how fucking rotten this world is. Everyone is just horrible to each other.
You only pay for one bloody person.
They're my guests.
Well, let me welcome your guests. Go on, get out! Go on!
Everyone is just trying to climb on top of your shoulders and kick your teeth in to get above you. And then someone else is knocking him off and climbing on top of him. Everyone is out to get each other, and the 5 prostitutes who you follow, 5 or 6, but the 5 main ones, have each other's back. And none of them are perfect, and some of them are even a bit unsavory characters. But I really like these prostitutes right from the get-go. You can just you get an instant sense that they are the bottom of the ladder. Everyone has just got their foot on their necks, especially that horrible. I mean, I'm not sure if you'd call him a pimp. He's essentially just a gangster who, I guess, one of his angles is extorting the prostitutes of the area.
Yeah.
But what a horrible villain he is.
The thing is, as well, it doesn't help. Everyone is pissed because obviously they can't drink the water because it's unclean. So all 5 of the victims, Mary, Kelly, etc., they were all raging alcoholics, like drunkards, because it would say they would get up at 5 a.m. and Mary Kelly would be like, "Oh, I've got the alcohol horrors," and then another prostitute would turn around and say, "Why don't you just go down to Barney's bar?" And this is 5 o'clock in the morning. The bars would be open just all the time, and just have half a beer. Like, so they just be constantly pissed round the clock, which doesn't help.
In fact,
them.
I think around this time, or maybe before it, there was a period where, when gin first became popular, it was so easy to produce and such a quick turnaround and so cheap that they ended up having to completely ban it from the country because everyone was so drunk all the time that society just was crumbling. Society was just grinding to a halt.
There's a famous photo by an artist in the Victorian times, and it's called something like, look it up, it's called something like gin horror. And all it does is depict, like, it's a big canvas of like a Victorian street, and everyone's just passed out, and there's like sick everywhere all over the floor.
It
they're
sounds
all just
like
fucked up on gin.
Was the Sun do that thing of the weekend of shame where they have the photos of Geordies like with takeaway falling off in a gutter.
Freshers week at Newcastle Uni. And then it'll be like a girl with like just wearing underwear and a bra. Like, this girl has no clothes. It's -5.
No shame.
And have you seen that photo of like, it's in Manchester? It's like a Renaissance photo. The police are like arresting like one guy, and another guy's just collapsed on the street with his beard. I'll show it to you.
Up in the thing.
Back to the film.
So From Hell is an adaptation of Alan Moore's graphic novel of the same name. Graphic novel was similar in a lot of ways, but different in an overall perspective. You actually followed it the whole way through from the perspective of the killer, and you got a lot more insight into his motivations and his reasons for it. We get some of those sprinkled throughout when he starts kind of speaking in grandiose terms. Sir William Gull, played by Ian Holm, who turns out to be the killer later on, spoiler alert, he has a couple of lines where he's talking about, I give birth to the next century, I did this, I did that. He goes a lot more into it, into the graphic novel, and he goes a lot more into the stonemasons and secret societies and how that is a prevalent thing in the higher classes and actual inner workings of the establishments of the UK and by extension the world.
Fear no God. Arise. Therefore your faith is well founded.
A lot of the way he does the killings is supposedly supposed to be linked to stonemason rituals. One of the rituals, the point of it was supposedly ensuring that male dominance would continue to reign in all societies for the rest of time. Which is an interesting point when you consider, from the very get-go, a theme in this movie is about women getting fucked about by men.
Yeah, yeah.
Personally, I don't care. The fewer pinch bricks on the streets, the better.
It's a very important thing to point out as well. Do you know in the film where they keep offering them grapes?
Mm.
They actually did find a stalk of grapes on one of the prostitutes' dead bodies in real life. So grapes back then were just unreachable for 99 point. So it must have been Declan. It must have been someone with a lot of money that done it in real. It must have been someone medically trained, because to like take out organs within like, you know, he didn't have that much time. Bearing in mind this Victoria is very dark. It's pitch black. To be able to like know where it is in the dark.
It's so interesting looking at the whole movie through the lens of class.
Yeah,
because it's you know, it's unavoidable, because the whole crux of this movie is that it plays off the theory that the 5 women had attended a wedding of their friend who had married who they perceived just to be a rich man, but turned out to be someone who was actually an heir to the throne. And this prostitute had a child, a legitimate child within marriage, who would actually have been an heir to the throne of the crown in England.
Yeah.
So it's amazing from that point of view, but then it's also so fascinating just seeing it play out all the time. Firstly with Jack the Ripper, who seemingly, you know, even if you don't go with this theory, which is fair enough, he still clearly appeared to be an educated man, an upper class man, a man who seemed to be a skilled surgeon. You know, you see all these glimpses into the way the upper classes hold on to power. The chief of police, who Johnny Depp goes in to see, and he's, you know, talking about the case and this, that and the other, and he's just decided already, it's probably Native Americans.
Yeah.
How many of them would be knocking about? Or are the Jews? Maybe go find some Jews. And when he mentions the fact that he appears to be an educated man, he's just like shuts that down straight away. And it's not even, there's no evidence of that. It's just, well, that's preposterous. This is clearly a working class scumbag. And he, as many of the other people in high positions we're going to see throughout the movie, has a Stones Mason's ring.
Yeah.
No. Remember, you've been watched.
They actually offered the role of Johnny Depp's character, Sir Sean Connery, and Brad Pitt before they went for Johnny Depp.
Also tried to get Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh, and Daniel Day-Lewis, sorry. Yeah.
So
and then they settled on Johnny Depp.
Any of those would have been amazing. Sean Connery.
Yeah, I can't see that working.
Would have been a bit old by that point, but it would have been interesting. But I was fine with it. Here's my thing with movies like this. I'm fine with the all Americans playing all these English roles, especially for some reason when it's Cockneys from this era or like Londoners from this era, because I don't know what they would have actually sounded like, but that film version of their accent, where it's just a really exaggerated Cockney accent,
yeah, I get you.
It's fine with me. To my ears, I'm like, yeah, that's what it looked like they would have sounded like, so I'll go with it.
What you want?
Shut your old bitch.
I know you. You're Geordie from Nickel Street.
Now, if they'd cast all English actors and Scottish actors in all the parts, but then just Johnny Depp showed up, might have been a bit annoying, but Johnny Depp's a very good actor. But the fact that so many of the roles were filled out with American actors, and the movie as a whole, this isn't supposed to really be that authentic. It's kind of like the way A Clockwork Orange is absurd, but it's absurd for the point that for some reason by notching it up to that level, it can actually tell you more in an authentic way about what it's trying to get across. Do you know what I mean? Like garbled nonsense, but that makes sense in a weird way. It's the same with this. It's adapted from a graphic novel, and they bring that cartoonish nature to it.
You know, there's one scene that really sticks in my head where it's like Big Ben and the sky behind is like blood red, and it's like ominous, dirty Victorian stuff. style. But the Hughes Brothers who directed it were huge fans of the graphic novel, as you can probably tell, and they wanted it to be so much like the graphic novel that, you know, this was filmed in Prague, and they deliberately built a whole set in Prague instead of like filming it in London in Whitechapel, just so they could get the feeling of the graphic novel, how it's kind of like laid out, that atmosphere. But what I also thought about this film, doesn't this just remind you of such a Tim Burton film about being a Tim Burton film in its way?
In a way, yeah, because it's got that gothic feel, that slightly cartoonish, otherworldly, real but not quite real feel, and Johnny Depp starring in it.
He nearly didn't take this role up when they offered him, because he had just come off the back of Sleepy Hollow, and he was like, the two roles are just exactly the same.
Do you know what? Another film for me that doesn't get enough love.
I love Sleepy Hollow.
Fucking definitely do that. So maybe we'll do it for Halloween.
We could do that. Yeah, Headless
Right.
Horseman. So
watch out if you remember that.
Yeah,
Hughes Brothers as well. They also interesting career. They debuted with making the sequel to Menace to Society.
Oh, really?
Followed it up with Dead Presidents, which is a brilliant, kind of a heist movie, but deeper than that. Also, you don't see many heist movies that involve black people for whatever reason. You just don't.
Yeah, good point.
But just really good film. Definitely check that out. And then made From Hell, and I think I should look this up. I don't think From Hell made a lot of money. Yeah, I think it was a bit of a flop, and it kind of got slated by the critics a bit at the time.
I can see why.
In a way. Like, I remember it didn't even really feel. I never really felt like it got a cult following afterwards either, which it deserved. Definitely, it deserved to be a success at the time, but it definitely deserves a cult following. But I don't think it ever really gained that either. So their career kind of floundered, and the last real big budget movie they made was The Book of Eli.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a shame their career mostly seemed to end after this.
Yeah. I quite liked the chemistry between. It's weird that Heather Graham's in it.
I love Heather Graham.
Was she in Knight's Tale?
Yes. No, I don't think she was. No, she was going out with Heath Ledger, who was filming A Knight's Tale in the studio next door.
Yeah, she was going out with Heath Ledger, so she'd like run. It's quite funny, like the Hughes Brothers were saying, like she'd disappear and then she'd be on the set of Knight's Tale.
Really?
They had to go and grab her because she was with old Heath. So yeah, she's really good in it. Like she's. I like Heather Graham. She's like a very good actress.
I believe that like it's hard. Like in movies, it's a really common thing where people have to fall in love in like 2 days or 3 meetings of each other because you know movies have to move fast.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to tread, but I believed it enough in this. Not only because, you know, it's the Victorian era, and let's be real, like, I feel like people got married
they did.
On a whim, and it was, you know, it was quite contractual a lot of the time, understandably. It just is what it is. Like, the idea of actually marrying for love is quite a modern concept anyway. But I believed their romance, I believed their chemistry, even though it developed in the space of no time. And that brings me on to an interesting element in this of how they differed from the graphic novel. In the graphic novel, the detective does not have visions. The clairvoyant is another character. However, the clairvoyant also admits quite early on that they make up their visions. Whereas in the film, visions are absolutely real, and our detective, Johnny Depp, has visions all the way through.
You've seen something. What did you see?
A petticoat saturated with blood.
Even from the start, when he wakes up in an opium den, as his Scottish little detective buddy or whatever he is kicking him.
Hagrid?
Is that? Oh yeah, that is Hagrid.
I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, so
I shouldn't have said that.
Hagrid wakes him up in the opium den, and he'd already kind of knew he was going to come to him because he had this vision of it happening. And I like how they play this throughout, where he's having these visions of the killings before they're happening, and he's getting there. When he actually first meets Heather Graham's character, you know, not when he first meets her at the graveside, where he first approaches him about helping them with the case, but when he meets her later in the bar, once she started to trust him a bit, And she thinks he's making fun of her at one point, saying like, "Oh, you'll never be a mother."
Yeah.
And then he says, "No, I can see you by the seaside with lots of children, blah blah blah." And you start to wonder, like, is that him just thinking fast in the moment, or was that actually him having a vision of the future where she'll have his child by the seaside? Johnny Depp started to realise that he started to get his suspicions that the heir to the throne might be the person doing the killings, or at least very closely connected to the killings. And so he takes Heather Graham to an art gallery, and he shows her around, and she sees the Queen for the first time. And you realise, she says like, "Oh, she doesn't look like a very nice woman." And you realise, yeah, most people would have no idea who these people are, what they look like. Like, the level of information we have today is so unfathomable to people 20 years ago.
See,
let alone, you know, back then, no one would no normal person would ever have their photograph taken, let alone know what other people look like. So she doesn't even know what the Queen looked like. But then when he takes her on to see the picture of the heir to the throne, as a way of getting her to see if she recognises him. And it's just such clever storytelling, and such an interesting location to do it in, and it also just gives you an insight into how different these times were.
And they're still doing those traditions to this day, because obviously the Queen has died. And when they announced Charles as the new king, and obviously this was my exact reaction when I first saw this film, how can they not know it's him when I first saw it? But then in all this kind of like stuff in the Queen's, after the Queen's died, all the traditions they're still doing, the guy goes out on the balcony with a big scroll and goes, "We now proclaim that King Charles III is king." And I'm like, why are they fucking like reading it? We all know it. And then they were saying on the news, because no one like had social media or anything, that's the way they'd announce it to people on the street. And like, I was thinking, just clocked it when I watched From Hell, I forgot that they didn't have like social media or mobile phones, and I'm like, it's fucking, it blows your brain.
You didn't have all that shit, so it gives you an idea of how uneducated these people are, how little they know about the inner workings of the world, which why it makes no sense of why these secret societies run the world. Secret societies at all these higher levels, you know, the chief of police, the surgeon of the heir to the throne, who turns out to be Jack the Ripper himself. All these people in higher places are part of these secret societies. The other high up surgeon who Johnny Depp meets when he goes to the surgeon's convention.
One tap above.
So going back to the beginning, where we see the heir to the throne's wife, who he's married in secret, they both get taken away, and she gets taken away to that sanatorium, and they showcase the supposed brand new procedure, the lobotomy.
Terrors or something.
It wasn't actually around the Victorian era at this time. It wasn't even invented here. It was invented in Sweden about 10 or 20 years later. But it just works well. I like the fact that they include a lot of these different things from the era that aren't necessarily relevant to the plot. The fact that John Merrick, the Elephant Man, is featured in it.
Yes.
Quite a number of times, actually. Obviously, there's the most significant scene where you see him shown to the room of surgeons and medical guys from around the country. But also, he's featured walking in the background quite a few times.
Is he?
Where you wouldn't really notice him.
Really?
I didn't notice until someone pointed it out. But it's just interesting where I feel like partly it's trying to show just how chaotic and awful and harsh this world is, but also how information and things were gate-kept by the higher classes, and how much, you know, they just kind of viewed these people as like not even human in a way. You know, the Elephant Man, the woman they lobotomize in front of everyone. You know, they're not doing this to other aristocrats, are they?
Yeah. On the subject of the Elephant Man, because I didn't really understand that exchange where the guy, when they took his cloth off, poor man, and he was like, "John Merrick," and then he whispers in his ear, "Joseph," basically what happens is, in real life, everyone called him John, but he insisted on being called Joseph because that was his real name. Because he had a, half brother who was normal called John, and they always mixed them up. So he's like, my name's Joseph.
You'd think you'd tell the difference.
Yeah, I know, but
yeah, and the doctor who actually took him on had this obsession with calling him John for some reason.
I hear someone coming, sir.
So what did you think of the killings?
Apart from the last one, which was actually inside, I thought it was a bit like tame in a way, like kind of thing, compared to how it actually was in real life.
Yeah, it's interesting because especially the last killing, they completely downplay the last killing and all the killings, but especially the last killing. That in reality, he absolutely
butchered him,
eviscerated. And the last one was so over the top that there's a lot of theories that it wasn't actually Jack the Ripper at all, but it was someone that inadvertently killed a woman and got scared, and to cover it up, tried to replicate what he had heard the Jack the Ripper killings were like. And naturally, with these things, the idea of something we build in our minds is often more grandiose than the actual event. And they think he just, he'd heard, by the time Chinese whispers, by the time he gets to the last person, it was, he tied her entrails all around the lampposts and played bowling with her kidney, and so he just completely eviscerated and pushed her organs all around the room and removed her womb and threw it over here and all this.
Put it on tables and
But nevertheless, it's completely downplayed. And do you know what? I'm alright with it because this isn't I don't think it would have added anything. And the fact that they've made you really like Heather Graham, and she's fallen in love with Johnny Depp's character, who you like. Who doesn't root for a little romance? Yeah. You want them to get together, you want her to get away. So, not only did you not need the graphic violence to create the impact of that scene, it would have just felt kind of distasteful after you followed this character the whole way through, which maybe is doing a dishonour to the victim, because that is what happened to her, whether you think it's tasteful or not. But it would have just been horrible to see Heather Graham that eviscerated after following her through the whole movie.
Yeah, I think this bit's a bit, because she plays Mary Kelly, doesn't she?
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure, but in real life she was an actual Ripper victim, so I don't know why. What
do you mean?
In real life, Mary Kelly got killed by him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Heather Graham gets killed by him.
Oh shit, sorry, you're right.
Oh, sorry. No, she doesn't.
No, she doesn't.
Well,
she escapes to the beach or whatever it is.
Well, they play on it. It's a clever way of playing on it.
Yeah.
They play on it the fact that... And it makes sense because this victim would have been so eviscerated. Who would have known who it was? I think they did know who she was. But, there's that little Frenchie that... One of the prostitutes is a lesbian, seemingly.
Yeah.
And she's always finding...
Kissing them.
Sometimes finding a lesbian, sometimes finding a non-lesbian just to... she'll pay for their supper so that they'll fuck her, basically. And... the little French girl who had followed him home when the other two prostitutes went out and got murdered, she gets killed in her place. And it's interesting because you see when he's killing the final victim, you see he actually starts having visions of what's to come from it. So you wonder, are his visions real? Is he just crazy?
Yeah.
Because visions apparently exist in this world. Johnny Depp has visions. Now, is he just is Jack the Ripper just insane and he's just seeing nonsensical things because we're getting an insight into his mind? Or, is there credence to what he says when he believes that he is moving into a different plane of existence by committing these murders and by protecting the future of the British Empire?
Because we see in the last sequence when he's getting interviewed by the Freemasons, his kind of like a lizard transformation. His eyes roll into the top of his skull, I will do this, and I'm like, Yeah, it does allude to...
It says, I have no peer in this room.
Yeah. It kind of alludes to that he is a godlike character.
I really want to read the graphic novel right now, because those little sprinkles of him talking about, you know, the stonemasons and secret societies and secret rituals and cults and all these things of why they was doing what he was doing, that was what captivated me the most and really tickled my pickle the most. But you just get little tidbits of it in this movie, and apparently the book leans into that a lot more, and you follow it from the killer's perspective the whole time.
Yeah.
Johnny Depp's character barely features it. It's just mentioned a couple of times.
I heard that it's literally mentioned in like 2 chapters. That's about it.
Why do I have to be exposed to this degradation over and over again? I've looked at the mess twice.
The people that perform autopsies were actually like voted in by government, and they were kind of like they wanted to be voted into a specific district, and they'd like go up against each other. So like the people that wanted to be voted into like Whitechapel and then got shit at area would hate that other one, and then basically they go against each other and like try and discount each other. When they examine the body, they were like, no, what he's saying isn't true. It's not like that at all. And then it'll be all conflicting reports instead of being like, we need to actually band together and look at this properly and put our heads together. So obviously there was different documents saying ABC about the body, and then another one be like, no, it wasn't like that. This is from an amateur's blade, like so. All of that. So if you've got that, how have you got any hope of catching?
I believe this was done by someone with at least a working knowledge of dissection. Either an educated man, such as a doctor.
An educated man? That's preposterous.
This is kind of like a film that I actually just stumbled across. Like, you know, back in the day when in your room you just had like a square box TV on a bracket that came out, and all I had was channel 1 to 5, and I think at like 1 in the morning I had channel 5 on, and I just saw Johnny Depp as the detective, and I was like, what is this film? And I've seen it numerous times since then. But what I do like about this film is the way that it's faithful to Alan Moore's adaptation, and also the way that a lot of the stuff like Alan Moore's graphic novel included in it is historically accurate. I do like that about it as well. And lastly, I like to echo what you said about kind of like the sets and the way they've set it up, that cartoonish kind of like very creepy atmosphere they've created, and it all feeds in, I think, Declan, to be a good film that I would certainly rewatch again in the future.
Yeah, I love films that take real life historical events and rewrite them or reinterpret them in some way. You know, Tarantino does it all the time these days, and I just love it. I love seeing the alternative universe version of events, or what could have been, or just rewriting history. I find it fascinating and makes for great cinema, and this is no different. I love this version of Jack the Ripper, this version of events, this conspiracy that was a part of every single tier of the British establishment, all the way up from the monarch, all the way down to the gutter prostitutes and scumbags and criminals and punters that were crawling around the putting lane. This movie is a serial killer movie, a conspiracy movie, and a period drama all rolled into one. And the most Tim Burton-y movie that Tim Burton never directed. Really underrated, I'd say. Forgotten about. It doesn't even have cult status. It seemed to flop on every front, but it didn't deserve to. It was a really interesting movie. At times, the thing that lets it down most, I feel like, is the direction. It just feels that, not amateur, but just that little tier below the kind of quality that it had in every other department, from the writing to the set design to the visuals to the acting. It was just all there, except for that steady, accomplished hand to guide it all and piece it all together. So for that, it's just below being a great movie. But if you're a fan of Jack the Ripper, or never really been a fan of Jack the Ripper, never got what all the fuss was about. You know, he only killed 5 people. What's the big deal?
Yeah.
Big top hat, fuck him.
Yeah.
But watch this movie and you'll get kind of like the way sometimes you might wonder why is everyone going on about JFK. There's once you get under the surface of just a simple serial killer who killed 5 people, there's so much interesting theories and interesting details and strange, mysterious coincidences to uncover behind the Jack the Ripper case. And this is a beautiful, mostly accurate, and then heavily fictionalized version of all that wrapped into one. And it's always great to see Alan Moore's work adapted for the big screen, even if he hates it. So definitely go watch From Hell.
This is the Filmy McFilm Film Show.